I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Mr. Allen, would you please review the agenda, making particular note of action items for those who might want to make public comment on those items?
We have the approval of the minutes on August 27. Then there's the director's report. And we're going to be talking about if and when, if we receive any challenges to mail absentee applications or ballots, how we would, what the form should look like and what the processing policy should look like. I'm going to review poll worker training, the status of absentee and mail ballots, new sample ballots that are on the web, where we are with voter registration, voter service center status, hash testing, logic and accuracy testing, new demonstration ballots, status of the meeting minutes on the web, a pending precinct polling relocation. That is a possible action item. I don't know whether you want to approve that or not, depending on the description. And then standby pay for poll workers. And we don't have any campaign finance waiver requests. And our next meeting date is October 22nd, unless we may need to call at the call of the chair to consider the polling place change I just mentioned and or anything else. And that's about it.
All right. So the only action items are approval of the minutes, the mail-in absentee challenge form and challenge processing policy, pending precinct polling place relocations, and standby pay for poll workers. With that, would anybody like to make public comment this morning? Please, sir. Say your name and where you're from.
Good morning, James Turner, from Chester, Pennsylvania, Chester 1-8 polling district. And the purpose of my comment is our poll location, and we understand, has been changed. Originally, it was at the barn in Chester Park, which is under renovations. In the last election, we were at the Parkside Firehouse, which was within that area. For this election, we have been told that our polling place is going to be at Stetzer School, which is basically several miles, if you will, and more complicated for our seniors to get to. And so my concern is that our seniors who live right around that area are going to be very much inconvenienced, and this is a very important election for both parties. And so as a result, I would really request that you consider a different location for that polling place closer to the 1-8 district. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any information? I don't have direct information about that particular change. So I just don't know if anybody's able to speak to it today. I don't want to speak off the cuff, but if Mr. Allen or if anybody has information about now, or we could follow up on that later.
No, real briefly, just before the primary election, about 2 weeks before, we got a call from the city asking what our budget might be for fixing the roof on the barn building at the park, as the gentleman referenced. And we immediately went out and scoped it out, and the hole was significant. And there were materials from, ceiling tiles and everything else on the floor. It was not an appropriate polling place. So as an emergency move, we scoped out possible other sites, but at the end of the day, we had no willing landlords, and we moved it in with neighboring Parkside Fire Company, which for some residents is actually closer, but nonetheless, that was a temporary solution. After the primary, we knocked on just about every door. I forget if it's a Salvation Army or a Goodwill type facility, the Friends building in those two precincts, a funeral home in those two precincts, the literacy center, all of whom said no, 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 no. So our next alternative was Stetzer School, our last alternative. It's not a preferred site, but we already have 3 precincts at our own voting machine warehouse. We don't think we can make that 5 or 4. And I understand the gentleman's concerns entirely. And I just want to assure him that we explored every possible avenue in that area. There was also a church we explored, but it has rather steep stairs that have a very brief landing down to the entrance, and it's wholly inaccessible in terms of for a voter in a handicap or a walker or for that matter, possibly a cane. So I wish there were more alternatives within those two precincts. The barn was it for many, many years. With the hole in the roof, we can't use that. I've received assurance from the city that it is on the capital improvement list with federal funding that they receive, but it's not going to be fixed this election. So we'll be able to get back there soon, not soon enough.
And sir, it's certainly, you hear the diligence. I know that we put it in. I just didn't know what it was because that's how our team works. But there have been times where members of the community have been able to help, convince, I don't mean in a coercive way, I mean in a friendly way, the importance of opening up a site that has otherwise been resistant. I've seen that happen, and it's been a positive agreement among everybody. I don't know if that's something that you know, and I can't certainly put that onus on you, but I just appreciate that you came in. Sounds like we hope that we can be back at the barn by the next election. This is an important election. Obviously, they all are important, but this is particularly one where there will be a lot of voters. But that's, I guess, where we are at. If you have any further questions about that, I wouldn't hesitate to call the voter machine warehouse and talk to them about possibilities. Maybe there was something they didn't think of. It sounds like, though, that they were pretty diligent in trying to find a new location that was more convenient to more voters.
So if I'm able to.
You are, because this, I mean, I understand your concern. It sounds like this is not the ideal situation for the community.
If you can get the funeral home or the literacy center, for example, to change their minds, wonderful. We'll bring it back before this board. If you can get city officials to, I mean, we had a situation with another pair of precincts where we reached out to the mayor and he was able to reach out to the owner and convince them to stay with us. So, any help that you can provide. I mean, we've knocked on the door and had the conversation and have been told no.
Thank you. And our schools are our fallbacks because they have to, by law, provide their locations to us. So that's sort of our safety. As you may remember during COVID, when a lot of places shut down, that's where we fell back to in a lot of locations as well. So that's why schools come up a lot. Thank you. Any other public comment? All right. Seeing none, then let's move over to the approval of the minutes for August 27th. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes of August 27th.
I'll second.
No discussion? Any discussion? Sorry, I shouldn't say. I'm assuming no discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. That motion passes. All right, Mr. Allen, please start to provide your report.
Okay, we've got a lot of items. I'll try to get right through it. Last week, we performed some rudimentary tests in preparation for locking down the database. We locked down the database on Thursday. As background, Delaware County was one of the first counties to submit mock-ups of ballots to the Department of State for a pre-review to check on the general layout and any contents of the ballots well ahead of the final court case that came down 8 days ago. So after the final court case came down from the Supreme Court, the Department of State, before that, the Department of State had some feedback on items, but overall, we received a good, clean bill of health. And then after the last court case was decided, we resubmitted our ballots to the Department of State. To my amazement, we received a new request from the Department of State last Wednesday. It was something we could easily change, but nonetheless, I was raising the question, why wasn't this asked in August? But we were able to make the changes, and on Thursday, we locked down the database to begin the final tests and to begin preparing the ballot orders, as well as, and the ballot orders start with the logic and accuracy ballots, which we have to proceed with first. Other preparations include the installing. We need to finish work with a contractor, purchasing actually, to acquire new shelving for the paper poll books and voter registration, testing on the new set of high-speed scanners at the Union Power Plant. Meantime, the voting machine warehouse is training workers right now to be ready for the start of logic and accuracy testing there tomorrow, Wednesday, the 25th. A couple of weeks ago, the next item, we received some emails that appeared to be raising questions about the eligibility of a handful of mail ballot or absentee ballot voters from Delaware County and whether they are still eligible to be voting in Delaware County. They were not formal challenges under the law, but they might become formal challenges down the road. So I began to inquire with the Department of State on whether there were any forms that voters would file a challenge on. I was informed that there is no, such as the form to challenge a voter registration. I was informed by the Department of State there is no such form. So I received, so after getting that, I reviewed with our solicitors and what the law is, and I created a submission form for the Board of Elections to review, submitted that to you last week for your review, along with a draft policy for processing any challenges to mail or absentee ballots if they should come. I'll now turn it over to our solicitor, Manley Parks, to discuss further before asking the board if it has any questions and if there might be a motion to modify or approve the draft form and policy for processing any challenges that may be filed between now and the Friday before Election Day.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, this issue is governed by 25 PS Section 3146.8F, which addresses people who are seeking to challenge an application for an absentee ballot. The absentee ballot, an application for a mail-in ballot or a mail-in ballot requires a $10 cash deposit for each such challenge and indicates the parameters of how the challenge will be administered or addressed. In broad terms, as is consistent with our practice in many other areas of election administration, we find it useful to have a written policy governing these things. And it hadn't really been necessary to this point because we've not had any challenges of these applications in any of the time that I've been the solicitor of the board since January of 2020. And so far I'm aware there were no, well, among other things, there weren't mail-in ballots before January of 2020. So at least as to mail-ins, this is a new process, kind of an Act 77 created situation. So Jim created the initial draft and we helped him revise and refine the draft policy, which would be internal and would just create some guidance for the employees that would be basically at the front lines of these, accepting the challenge, accepting the deposits. It made sense to create a form for this because it's much easier to keep track of and manage. And so Jim put together that form and we have helped him finalize that subject to the comments and changes recommended by this board or insisted on by this board, as well as a form of a letter that would go to the voter and notify the voter of the challenge. And then the idea in a broad term would be that there would be a hearing, most likely contemporaneous with the provisional ballot hearing to address any such challenges, and the board could hear them individually and vote on them individually as appropriate. So we've got a process in place. I think that it will permit, in the event of challenges, an orderly and clear and transparent process for the public for any of these challenges. So that's what we've put together for the board's consideration, and my recommendation that we adopt a package of materials as submitted. It's consistent with the statutory language that's been identified, cited, and circulated. And I think just in the sake of good order administration, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I'll just start. I've reviewed it. What I so appreciate about both of your teams, the solicitors teams and Mr. Allen, that you took this challenge, this possible potential for challenge, and I was going to say challenge in the other definition, the opportunity to create a transparent process documented so that we could show everybody how that we're going to approach it. I agree, having reviewed it, that it will create a much more orderly process. I appreciate the solicitor and your team's deep review of it. There was a lot of legal dialogue about making sure that we got it right, and that's important. Also securing the funds and not having them in an unsecure way, because it does require funds to make a challenge. And then running a process that fits into, it's actually sort of mirrors some of the processes we have in many ways. So it's not disruptive, it's just additive. And I think that that's exactly what we should be doing when there's gaps in process just created by the law. So I am supportive of this, but I want to make sure that all the board members have a chance to speak to it and ask any questions. Mr. McBlain, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. I mean, I'm supportive of the policy that was drawn up as to how to go about investigating it, and also the form. I think the form's appropriate. I know, going back, there was some form to challenge an absentee ballot, that used to be put in the packet that went out to the polling places, of course, prior to 2020. So I agree that there should be some form available to challenge it, and this would be, if we adopt this today, I would ask, I know, Mr. Allen made reference that we received from the same person, it's probably a couple dozen at this point, at least on the surface, you don't know what the story is, but on the surface, these appear to be people that are registered in 2 different states and have requested an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot in Pennsylvania. So on the surface, it certainly seems like there needs to be some look at for these folks. So, but yes, I agree. You have to follow the rules. I've said follow the rules since I've been on here. So, let's create the form. Let's send it out to that individual, make it available to the party leaders, and reinforce what the law requires is that, hey, if you want to do this, it has to be done by this date. I think it's the Friday before the election, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and it requires a $10 deposit, so that you've got, it's short time, but there's plenty of time for this to be done now for the parties. So that's all the comments.
Yeah, no, that's an important point you raised though. So how are we gonna make this form available? Is it going to be posted on our website if people want to challenge it? What's the plan for transparency in that way?
Well, I mean, the form would need to be completed and submitted in person along with the $10 cash deposit. I suppose we could make it available upon email request and put it on the web that way. I don't want to ring the dinner bell for people from across the country to start, filing objections, willy-nilly, needlessly through email or other means. So we can make it available upon request to registered voters, electors in Delaware County, once we verify that.
Okay, that works for me. I don't know if you have any questions about that.
I just had a follow-up question, and I didn't know the answer to this, and I meant to find this out, was that, and Mr. Parks probably addressed it, is who may challenge it? Does it have to be somebody, for instance, again, in the absentee ballot world way back when, it had to be somebody from that precinct. Who can challenge it here? Our director raises a good question. I mean, what if somebody from California, challenges it? We see all kinds of organizations. I mean, who can challenge a voter from Radnor?
Right. So I think there are a couple of limitations on this. First of all, I think that certainly a registered voter from the precinct can challenge. And I think that it would be appropriate that, and in a lot of instances under the code, and I don't know the code is especially clear on this, a registered voter from the county can challenge. I think it's typically the case because of general standing principles that party officials, assuming that it's a party-related issue, and candidates can challenge. I don't know that there's any proposition that folks beyond that universe can challenge. And beyond that, I will say that the challenge form requires, and the statute requires, an affirmation that the challenge is true and correct. So if somebody's out there just willy-nilly sending in challenges from, California, I think that you have a question of whether they're appropriate challenges just based on who's making them and the fact that they don't have any obvious standing to challenge the status of a voter in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, in a Pennsylvania election. But on top of that, it seems to me unclear that a person in California would be able to accurately meet the requirements of swearing the kind of oath that you need to swear to be able to make this challenge. So I think there's a practical layer of concern as well in those instances, and I would, look at them with very good care, because I would have real questions about how that oath could be true.
I have just a ministerial concern about that. I don't think this is something you can phone in or mail in with a cash payment. I don't want to invite cash payments through the mail. It's the absolute worst idea possible. But looking at the statute, the way it was originally written, A, B, C, D, E, F. F is this section with the challenges or potential challenges. B, which was deleted by Act 77, references how watchers shall be permitted to be present when the envelopes containing official, so this is all about being able to object in some way or monitor the counting of the ballots. Now, B was deleted by that 2019 amendment, presumably from Act 77. But there you go with kind of a reference to watchers, meaning people who are registered voters in that county, who then received a watcher certificate, which does not require any classes or training, but nonetheless from the one of the campaigns whose name is on the ballot or political party. So that's where I'm inferring that this has got to be a Delco voter.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, at a minimum, we would accept the challenges from a Delaware County registered voter for anybody in Delaware County. If you're in Radnor 7-2, you don't, and if you want to challenge somebody in Springfield 1-1, we'll allow that. And then I guess it's obvious, but just to make sure we say it, if the challenge comes in, that mail-in ballot gets pulled out and held until the time of the hearing. It's not obviously processed with the rest of them on election day.
That's correct.
And so the challenges to standing and other things, that would be something for consideration by the board.
Yes.
Mr. Alberts?
So I think it's great to have a policy. I think it's great to have a form. I have one note on the letter that you sent to us to review. The first sentence, we are writing to notify you that your mail absentee application has been challenged. It's not the passive voice I object to. It's more the sort of lack of clarity as to who's doing the challenge from that sentence. I don't want to alarm people and make them feel like, we as the big bad government are challenging their application. I think I would suggest language that would say something like, we have received a challenge to your mail absentee application from a third party. A copy of the challenge has been enclosed, yada, yada. I think that would just perhaps soften the tone, just a style choice. But I think when people get letters like this and they got the official government seal on them and, this is their vote, especially in an impactful presidential election year, I don't want to unnecessarily alarm people. I mean, it's a serious matter. We should call their attention to it, but I don't want them to think that. I want them to be clear that this is some outside person who has issued a challenge, which may or may not have merit, not that they've done something wrong and we flagged it in our, bureaucratic processes.
That seems like a reasonable
I think
provision.
that Mr. Alberts raises a fine point about the passive voice. It's just less clear. That's really what it is.
I'm actually a big fan of the passive voice when used correctly.
It's just not clear to the voters what you're saying here. It just could be clear.
Yeah, and I think it just sends, there's a different message that could be inferred
Right.
from one statement versus the other.
Right.
Well, we are including a copy of the challenge. So that's the very next sentence. A copy of the challenge is closed.
Oh, no, I get that.
So, yeah.
I think that initial.
Yeah, but
sentence,
I agree with
There's
you.
an emotional response. that,
There's good.
I-
right.
I would also, as long as we're editing that, your mail absentee application or ballot, I would add that. So the challenge
Right,
can be to
it's
either
for two
one.
parties.
I'll entertain that as a friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. then with those amendments to be made at the discretion of the solicitors, oversight with Mr. Allen, is there a motion to approve the three, let me just say them right. The challenging mail absentee ballot or application process, the attestation, and the cover letter.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Then all those in favor say aye. Aye. None opposed. That motion passes. Mr. Allen.
Next, I'm pleased to report poll worker training began 10 years ago in this room. In fact, you can see it's set
10
up
years
right
ago?
10 days ago.
Okay.
Did I say years?
You said years ago.
Well, it actually began a century
Okay,
ago.
wow.
but,
In fact, I believe I attended a
centuries
poll
ago.
worker training 10 years ago in this room when I was a judge of elections. So
Ago for this election. Poll worker training, as you can see from this, the configuration of this room is set up for it right now. What you'll have are three poll workers working together, going through all the lesson plans from the setup of the polling place to closing down and everything in between. So first, I just want to make 2 points. The poll worker at the first class announced we used these poll pads for the first time in April at the primary, and these were a game changer. There were nods in response around the room. Second point, when our poll worker coordinator finished presenting everything about the election day duties and handed it off to someone to talk about just the closing duties, there was a spontaneous round of applause from the poll workers. So I think we're continuing to do some things right in terms of making their lives and making their job easier to do and clearer and trying to address every possible scenario. As I've discussed with all of you this summer, our goal was to complete any big changes that the poll workers or the voters might see before last primary, so that only changes of the most technical and minor manner that really don't affect the voters. Nothing major on the process would come at this election. That big round of applause, I think, reflects the success that the poll worker training team has had in simplifying the processes and make everything go smoother, including at drop off on election night. Next, military overseas ballots by law were in the mail by the deadline last Saturday or emailed, depending on the voter's preference. So approximately, I'm trying to think if the number was 1,100 or 1,300, but they were all sent out with the exception of one that was problematic in the Shure system, and that was handled yesterday. The status of mail absentee ballots is simply we're finishing testing, and we expect them to hit the mailboxes. The first big civilian mail drop of about 60,000 right about October 4. We think they'll be mailed October 1st, October 2nd. They should be hitting the mailbox October 4 if all goes smoothly. We currently have 60,000 applications for mail and absentee ballots. That's a healthy number, but to give perspective, I don't think we're going to approach anything near what we saw in 2020. I've said that all year long. In 2020, we had 170,000 applications, of which about 130,000 ballots were returned and counted. So again, this is the latest indicator that we're not going to have anywhere near as much voting by mail unless something dramatically changes in the next 20 odd days. Also, what mail ballots we will have will be slightly more bipartisan than they were 4 years ago, as both parties are encouraging use of mail and absentee voting this year. Applications still lean more D than R as a whole, but there's been a push by both parties. Meantime, in terms of the Voter Service Center here at the Government Center in Media, we plan to open that on October 1. That will be mostly to help any voters who might be about to go out of town or who simply want to apply and receive the ballot and the return envelope over the counter, as opposed to getting it through the mail. Next, sample ballots are on the web now. We made some modest changes to the sample ballots. There's a darker watermark of the word sample, and we removed the Delaware County seal from those samples. This was in response to a request at the primary from the GOP. This way, even if these sample ballots are used in campaign literature, we want to reduce the perception that such materials were in any way endorsed by the county, and also want to make it ever more evident that these samples will not be read by a ballot scanner, not that they ever could have been read by a scanner in any past election. Voter registration continues to process new registrations and updates every day. They're getting online forms from voter registration drives, forms through the mail. We still get some duplicates, and Crystal will be talking about that in the Voter Registration Commission. Please, if you get a form and you think you're already registered, you can check your status and make sure you register at your current address at vote.pa.gov/status. Again, that's vote.pa.gov/status. And that'll allow you to also check on your any vote by mail application. So if you get an offer to apply again, before you fill out that form, check to see if you already did it back in February and April or something and you just forgot about it. Whether we have other voter service centers in late October in other communities is going to be dependent on whether we have adequate staff. So far we've mapped out the possibility of Chester City for the southern part, Chester Heights Borough for the northern part of the county, and Upper Darby for the eastern part of the county. Those are the options, but only if we feel confident we have enough people to assign to those locations who can work the intricacies of the shore system. So that's where we are as of this moment. For a couple of years now, I'm proud to report that Delaware County has been the only county in the Commonwealth to implement hash testing. I thought we were one of the only ones, but we learned at a summer conference that we're the only one to use. Then this is a testing of the software on all of the elements in our balloting system. A quick explanation is that hash testing is that we are pulling the software fingerprint from the servers and the voting machines to check to make sure they are an absolute 100% perfect match to the software, just as it was certified by the Election Assistance Commission at the federal level, and then the Pennsylvania Department of State. So we perform this testing on all of our servers that process all of the vote totals from the precincts and the central count of mail ballots. And we perform it on a random selection of precinct scanners. We perform that part in public. We perform the testing both before and after Election Day as an added layer of assurance. Technically speaking, any sort of hack or manipulation, however minute in the software, would prevent the election results from being read into the system from a V drive if we weren't to test it from one of the ones that weren't selected. But by performing the hash testing before logic and accuracy testing, and then after the election, we're adding another layer of tests to assure that the system is operating exactly as the software was certified. We'll begin logic and accuracy testing at the voting machine warehouse tomorrow, Wednesday, September 25th at 8:30 a.m. That is open to people representing either the two major political parties or the one group that registered 50 days before Election Day to as a watchdog against fraud. The following day, we'll begin logic and accuracy testing at the central count at the Union Power Plant at 10 a.m. on Thursday, September 26th. One authorized representative at a time from any one of the three organizations allowed to attend can be checking on that. I want to thank Rob Wright for delivering on a new offering. In front of you is a new ballot. You'll see a preview ballot. We developed the system so that we have a separate election database for presentations at schools, with civic groups, with senior centers, what have you, so that we can take a safe ballot that has only historic figures on it. So you see Benjamin Franklin and William Penn, and then for Cultural Commissioner, Gene Kelly, Sherman Helmsley, and Fred Rogers. And then for the Law Commission, Robert Morris, Sadie T.M. Alexander, Thomas Mifflin, Jared. So basically people from Pennsylvania's past They're the safest, by the way. Some people do demonstration ballots with celebrities. You never know who they're going to endorse or what they're going to say tomorrow. I am opposed to it.
And I assume these are statewide offices since none of these are Delaware County residents.
None of these are Delaware County residents. So this is a fun way to go out. We used it last week at a civic organization based out of Widener. And so for the first time, and it's a safe way to take a ballot scanner out with a full-time staff member and load it with this mock, and I mean entirely mock election, so that people can see what it's like to mark a ballot, how it'll reject it if it's overvoted, or if the whole page is undervoted, or how it'll handle a write-in vote, whatnot. So we're excited to be able to have that finally. So great. The chairwoman's long expressed a desire to have all of the minutes going back 4 years, going back before I got here, posted to the web. At the June meeting, I mentioned that I would get that done before the next meeting. I did get it done, but I did not mention it at either the two August meetings or, so it's up there now.
Thank you.
Going back 4.5 years to the start of 2020. We have some good news, but nothing that's actionable at this time. We received an indication that a site that has housed 2 precincts in the past in Chester City will be able to use those, host those precincts again in the fall. We received also bipartisan agreement just this past Friday from Chester Township about moving precinct back into the firehouse, but that could not be posted 5 days before this meeting. So if you want to vote to approve it pending that, I don't know if it's legal or not, pending the posting of the notice for 5 days.
I think the concern with doing that would be the point of the posting of the notice is in part, at least, to allow people to come here and weigh in. And so if you were to vote before the 5 days, you might be depriving people of the opportunity to comment before voting. So I would suggest that the more cautious path would be to go ahead and push this one down the road, allow the proper posting for the period of time, and then revisit this at a future meeting.
Very well. But we do have bipartisan agreement on moving it back. It was moved out of there in the first place because of construction at the firehouse. Next, we have a question of making certain that we have adequate standby judges. I would like to suggest that the board authorize us to pay those who sign up to be backup standbys on election day of $75. However, if they fail to answer their phone or decline an assignment, that backup pay would not be issued. Similar to how if we have standby people for drop boxes, if they fail to respond to the call or fail to accept an assignment, we do not pay them the backup pay.
How many, just to get a sense, how many people are you thinking of having on standby?
I would like as many as possible with at a maximum of 75 to 100. Just in case. I think this election is too important not to try to have as many standbys as possible. And I think this is a modest sum to be able to pay to make sure that voting continues uninterrupted or is with as little interruption as possible if something should befall or delay our poll workers from showing up.
Yeah.
And if they do not get a call and there is no need, they're paid for their availability? Or is it only?
I mean, if you're going to accept $75 to be a standby poll worker, in my opinion, you better have that phone on you all day.
No, but he's saying if they don't.
But if the need does not, if for some reason the need does not arise, you have
If the
50
need does
standby
not
people,
arise,
you
you
call
would
10
still
of
get
them.
this, you would get the
Right.
$75.
It's only if you don't answer the phone.
And if you do take an assignment, then you would presumably level up from your $75 standby fee to the actual fee that the position you take and fill for the
Right.
day is paid, which will in all instances be higher than 75.
So yeah, it would be a minimum of 140 for a full day, 240 if they took online training, 290 if they took in-person training. So correct. $75 would not be pay for the whole day if you are called and you do serve.
And do the standby workers need to take the training?
Preferably, but under the law, no one is required to take the training. We are able to require the judges of election to take in-person training once every 2 years. And that's worked out very successfully. And in order to receive credit for training, you also have to pass the test, which is which shuts down at 8 p.m. before Election Day because we want our poll workers to get a good night's rest before they wake up early on Tuesday.
I'm just asking, I mean, could we require standby poll workers to take the training? Because what I don't want to see is people just wanting to try to earn money by being standby in the hopes that they never get the call.
Absolutely, there's no reason we could not. This is entirely a creation of, if the board would authorize it, entirely a creation of this board as a prophylactic measure. And I think you could put any reasonable, qualification on it. So you could say, we'll pay you 75, but only if you
Take the
are
training.
standby, take the training, pass the test. And, and I don't think that from where I sit and I don't vote, I think that's a reasonable qualification. You want people standing by who are qualified.
Oh, by take the training, do you mean, I'm sorry.
They get paid for the training.
Yes, they would get paid for the training.
Yeah.
I mean,
But I mean, so we're clear, you're qualifying if you take the online training or the in-person training? Because that would be my recommendation.
Right.
Okay.
what I don't want is people to sit and try to get $75 from the county and really not, and to hope that the call never comes. And what we really need is, because the morning somebody doesn't show up, multiple people don't show up, they're having some trouble. You want to have trained workers going in a pinch. I mean, you don't want to have workers that are just there to help, but don't know what they're doing. That, I don't see how that would be a helpful standby.
No, I think that's a disservice to the voters and to that individual who
Right.
put in that stressful situation.
So, I mean, I'm supportive of that. First of all, we have that every time, right? I mean, every morning on election morning, some people don't show up for whatever reason. And this is going to be a long, hard day.
And this would be an alternative to a curbside, any warm body that's willing to run in. Here we have a person that's trained and
Trained.
ready to go.
Well, I would want to clarify that under law. I mean, mine,
No, of course. Yeah,
They could
right. I know
have somebody.
Yes.
Yes,
Right.
the judge could.
a resident of the district and would still have the prerogative, of course.
yeah, these are only emergency appointments.
Yes,
They're the
that's
last
exactly
resort.
right.
I mean, the
Last
first-
resort.
First would be a curbside election for some resident of that precinct.
Correct.
Right. But I mean,
If all
the
the
practical reality is that we just
Yeah.
don't see those people lining up to do this. So we need to have this cadre of people ready to go, because I mean, I've been at a polling place where there was no one, people were showing up wanting to vote. No one wanted to volunteer. That poll didn't open until 12:15 in 2008 general election.
Well, that's, yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you in that situation, but as we have all experienced, the more likely situation is the judge or the inspector is not going to be there. They line up their replacement,
Yes. Right.
which is a resident of that precinct. And then practically speaking, you conduct the curbside election there at 6:30, 7 o'clock that morning. So you
Right.
have I mean, in my opinion would be, I prefer to have a resident of that precinct, serve as an election officer there as the first choice. Certainly if no one steps up and
Mhm.
it's
Which also happens.
it's 8 o'clock, and the poll's not open or not functioning, then we have to exercise the emergency powers to send somebody in, but
Or during the course of the
So-
day, somebody gets sick. I mean, we've had other things happen where we've had to bring in workers if we could.
No, I agree wholeheartedly that that's the preference, and this is not meant to preclude, but to supplement that option. Secondly, if this is to address a situation where, let's say someone gets extremely ill or whatever, has to leave at like 10 in the morning, and the only people who are there are about to go to work, or they have a daycare situation, or whatever the situation is, and there's no one else available, that's when this is break glass in case of emergency type.
Well, I mean, I expect you will use it at some point. If we have this,
I hope we don't
program-
have to.
I hope we don't have to,
Yeah.
but I expect on a busy election with as much work, I mean, it just could happen. So I think it's a great idea. Mr. Allen, do you have any concerns then about the two caveats that they have to take one of the two trainings live or online and they have to pass the training?
No, I have no concerns with either one of those recommendations or those requirements.
All right. Well, then with those parts of the proposal, do we have a motion?
So moved.
I would second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes. Mr. Allen, thank you again for your thoughtfulness in trying to create opportunities so that we can make sure all our polling places function well with well-trained workers. I think this is a great idea.
Two minor items. We should recognize, I like to be able to endorse successful things that don't have anything to do with politics. Springfield High School was one of the recipients of the Blue Ribbon Award through the U.S. Department of Education. And of course, we need to recognize that the Philadelphia Phillies won the Eastern Division title last evening. And
Do they want a certificate from this board?
no, but I'd be happy to issue it to any Cub fan in particular.
They do. And I do think we need to recognize specifically Pam's work. You mentioned that she got a round of applause for poll training, but I mean, that poll worker training. But the idea, having been to poll worker training, that the group would spontaneously applause is not one I would have contemplated when I attended. I think that that's an awesome success. I also love what Rob has come up with, this idea, because if nothing else, I mean, kids don't know how to do bubble tests anymore. We had to all do them, but they need to learn how to fill out a bubble, right? So that they can vote and have their votes counted in the future. So I think that's a great training opportunity for everybody of every age.
And if anyone can overcome low ballot position, I believe it's Fred Rogers, so.
All right, well then, no campaign finance waivers. Not sure yet from Mr. Allen, from what you said, whether we will need a sooner meeting. There
Well, we
certainly
will
seems
for
to
the,
be indication.
for at a minimum Chester Township.
Yeah.
The polling location moving back to the firehouse.
And maybe for voter service center pop-ups. So,
Yes.
okay. So everybody just be aware that October 22nd may not be the next meeting. There may be one earlier. Is there anything else, Mr. Solicitor?
Nothing from me.
Mr. Allen? Members of the board?
Madam Chair, I just want to raise one issue I raised before. And again, I want to urge, if we can, I mean, we have, well, in several weeks, our drop boxes will open to receive the absentee and mail-in ballots. I know it's become more of an issue. I've heard more, and the board has seen requests, for residents to look at the videos that are being captured at each drop box. And again, I'm not a computer or technical guy, and Mr. Wright's not here to explain, but I mean, my understanding is that our cameras technologically cannot do live streaming to, on a website or something like that, live, much like we do with the operations at the wharf. And I'd ask or urge Mr. Wright to take a look at that again to make sure I tell people that, to make sure that's a true statement. But if for some way, shape, or form that we can technologically live stream the cameras at the drop boxes, that we do address that, and I would urge us to do it as wholly transparent. I think it would give the public, I mean, some sense of security that they can look at it as it's happening live. And I also think it would perhaps eliminate two things. Number one, I'm aware, at least in other counties, groups have started to organize volunteers to sit there and watch drop boxes. There's a lot less of them in other counties, so it's a lot easier to organize and do. My fear certainly is that, that causes a confrontation between somebody that, might walk up with a handful of things, could be the newspaper for all the watchers know, but that we eliminate any sort of confrontation between those who want to watch, what goes on, and the residents who are voting. Number one, and number two, it sort of eliminates the problem of what do we do when somebody asks to watch the recordings, the right to know requests, do we put them through that to look at a recording? So the simple answer, in my view, would be that if technologically we're able to do it, let's just throw, much like we do with the operations at the wharf, throw the Dropbox live feed, if we can do that, onto the web, so that folks can take a look at it and ask any questions afterwards. So that's my only other comment, apart from the agenda.
I'm gonna speak freely, 'cause I don't have I'm all for transparency. I do have a concern that when we have the park police review it, they're trained to detect criminal activity. And I would have some concerns about what might happen if it was live streamed to police calls and complaints and every little, thing that people walking by. I'd be interested to see, but I do think we need to make sure that there's a way to make that live streaming transparent. If it's through someone filing a right to know and live watching it in a secure place along with the park police or near the park police, something like that, that would be more where I would head, just because of my concern about what might happen to all the not well-founded 911 calls or calls to the park police. But I think that Mr. Allen, I understood also that it was not technologically possible, but I think to the point that Mr. McBlain is making, we do want to be transparent about what we do, and we do need to think through how to, if we can't make it live streamed, how someone might approach being able to observe, not by standing around a Dropbox itself, but perhaps at a location here in the government center.
And Madam Chair, maybe I can correct myself if I'm not there, but I don't believe that the park police are viewing the Dropbox live feeds while they are open, and or all 35 of them, 36 of them, whatever we have at this point in time. I mean, there's not a park police officer just that I'm aware of that is watching 36 screens that's able to identify if there's a problem.
Well, no, that's not true. We pay overtime to have officers. We have for a few elections now. And they can attest to the fact that they call me at 3 p.m, 10 p.m. at night, 1 a.m, 3 a.m, 5 a.m. to tell me anytime a camera goes down. So they are monitoring those closely. And then I have to take action to either try to reboot the camera or, if necessary, close down the Dropbox. So they all have my cell phone number, unfortunately.
Well, I understand when one goes out and there's a problem at it, but if you're all telling me that there is a park police officer who is watching all 35 or 36 drop boxes 24 hours a day, that's new information to me.
Yes,
I don't know that
we have the overtime bills from park police for that. We have to
done that.
pay for that.
I also want to say,
The thing is, we also don't have park police at the hundreds of blue boxes in the Postal Service. And I just want to make 2 points about the drop boxes. One, if you're a believer in chain of custody, this is the most direct return of a ballot envelope that you can have from the voter to the election authority, no middle person, whereas the Postal Service, now you're inserting a middle person. So I've seen plenty of Postal Service handled ballots with postmarks that were on time, arrive 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months after Election Day. That's never been the case with the Dropbox.
Or 10 minutes, as we know from a couple of years ago.
Right. That was a few years ago. So I understand the concern, but the chain of custody is there. And the other point I want to make about the drop boxes is that if you believe in protecting people's rights to vote, you can't make them only go to the Postal Service. And I'm not saying that you're suggesting that, but there are people who oppose drop boxes generally, especially if they're returning that ballot 2 days, 3 days, 4 days before, or on Election Day itself. If they're only given the Postal Service, that's not going to work out for many of those individuals. So these do have a higher degree of security on them with the cameras that you don't have with the Postal Service. These do have better chain of custody. And these do provide the only avenue that can make sure that you can vote all the way up until Election Day, return that envelope on Election Day, and we can receive it and it'll qualify to be counted as long as it's in there by 8 p.m. So those are the points I'd like to make about the drop boxes.
and I would just reiterate those points. I think that much of the discussion we've been having about the drop boxes and the security cameras, I think are concerns raised due to ignorance of the situation that Mr. Allen just described with the postal, post offices and postal boxes that are not under camera, or quite frankly, bad faith efforts to discredit mail-in voting generally and drop boxes specifically because they want people's ballots to get lost in the mail, because they want people to not have that opportunity. I think that our job is to make voting as easy and as accessible for the most people as we can, to make sure that the election is conducted fair and make sure people are following the rules. But if your concern is that, you know, there's not a camera on one of the potential ways to get a ballot to us, but not on all the other ways, I'm not sure what problem we're actually trying to solve here. And if we're concerned about ballot harvesting, a practice that is legal in, I think, most states at this point, if you think that it affects the outcome of the election, you're not cut out to be a political strategist. I'm sorry, but it's illegal in this state. We have a duty to try to, you know, catch people doing it and prevent them from doing it. But if what you're concerned about is the integrity of the election, I think all this energy and effort on cameras on drop boxes it's misplaced. And quite frankly, the expense we go through to accommodate it is a disservice to the public. And that's my position on it.
If I could respond.
Sure.
Madam Chair, obviously ballot harvesting is illegal in Pennsylvania. You know, there are instances of it. Even if it's just two, we saw that in the gubernatorial election where Governor Wolf violated the law and his wife, but weren't prosecuted for it. And
what harm did that do? Did that affect the outcome of the election?
Well, so now we can violate any rule as long as we can speculate that it doesn't.
Nobody here is.
Look,
I'm not advocating that we tolerate
You know,
it.
this is not a rant about drop boxes. I understand we're going to have drop boxes here. I make a motion to eliminate all the drop boxes in Delaware County.
Your motion's going to.
Just to be clear, it's
And there's
not
no
an
second.
action item on the agenda, so we can't consider it.
Just a second, I can count. I mean, so, you know, but if we're going to have them, and we're going to have them in the multiple numbers that we do have them, which I understand why they were done that way. And we're going to have cameras on them. I'm just suggesting that what do we have to hide? If there is a technological way to live stream what's going on there, my opinion is that we should do that. And I've raised it before. I'm raising it now. You're now going to run into, as the board has received, a request to you know, monitor those things. I think it would be easier and it would eliminate problems if there was a technological way. Mr. Wright is very creative and he's been excellent so far in our IT to do that much the same way as we do it at the wharf, you know, to show all the operations that go on down there. That has worked to our benefit in the past when questions have been raised. So that's all I'm saying. I don't know whether or not ballot harvesting would be enough to swing an election. It hasn't thus far, but I don't know what, you know, the numbers could be in any certain race. But nonetheless, if we're going to do it, and just because their U.S. mail doesn't have video doesn't mean that if we choose to have video on there, we should make sure that it's as transparent as possible. So that's all I'm saying. And that if there's a way to do it and flip a switch, that's what I would recommend, you know, rather than fighting with folks or individuals or groups about access to it. I mean, when you have cameras, and then all of a sudden, and I'm not saying we're doing this, if you have cameras, but then make it difficult for people to actually watch what the cameras capture, that's what causes doubt amongst the electorate. Just my opinion.
No, I don't even disagree with you, Mr. McBlain, that we should continue to try to improve to make our elections more accessible. And so I'm sure, Mr. Allen, I know, having talked to you outside of the meetings, that you were constantly thinking about this, and with respect to the drop boxes, because of the requests, because of the talk. So I have confidence that you and Mr. Wright will continue to think of ways to make the election more transparent and, you know, with some review of the drop box cameras. Thank you. Any other comments? Any other comments?
No.
All right. With that, then we are adjourned, and I call to order the September 24th, 2024 Voter Registration Commission meeting. And with that, I don't see, are there no action items, Ms. Winterbottom?
There are none.
Okay.
I was hoping, though, we received an inquiry recently.
Well, before you begin, I just want to know if we should start with any public comment.
Oh, I'll go ahead. I'm sorry.
Is there any public comment for the Voter Registration Commission meeting? Please.
Hi, Laura Lewis, Radnor Township. I wasn't planning to talk today, but I was just listening to the previous. And I had a couple questions. You said the form,
If I could just, and I don't, you pause the clock if you could. This is a comment on the voter registration commission meeting, not public comment on any discussions or issues from the Board of Elections agenda meeting. Those are different issues.
to voter registration.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, you had said the form, that you have a form from the Board of Elections to challenge future mail-in ballots, and it'll be available upon request by registered voters. How do they know it exists to request it or where to find it? Just a question. Second, you mentioned that you said registered voters from the precinct or maybe from the county would have to make the request and that others would lack standing. And I just wanted to draw your attention to a court case at Supreme Court of Georgia on October 27th of 2022. And their ruling stated that, quote, injury need not always be individualized. Sometimes it can be a generalized grievance shared by community members, especially other residents, voters, or citizens, unquote. It also said, quote, it has long been recognized that members of a community, whether as citizens, residents, taxpayers, or voters, may be injured when their local government fails to follow the law, unquote, and quote, that the violation of that legal duty constitutes an injury that our case law has recognized as conferring standing to those community stakeholders, unquote. And lastly, that, quote, it is unsurprising that we have extended this logic to voters because they, like citizens and taxpayers, are community stakeholders. Voters may be injured when elections are not administered according to the law, unquote.
Okay.
So
So just to be clear, the questions are about the item from the last meeting. And the answer, I just want to answer the one.
Then we got to pause the clock. I would rather let her finish.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah,
okay.
are you finished?
Well, I was going to say
No,
this,
you have more
this
time.
also applies to whether you're questioning the validity of a registration of a voter, not just a mail-in ballot. And lastly, I thought that Delco had received near $1 million to help ensure the voter rolls were clean. Why would checking validity of a voter's registration as a recipient of a mail-in ballot or just in general not be covered by these funds?
Okay, there already is a form to challenge.
Are you done your public comment?
There already is a form from the Department of State. As I mentioned in my remarks, there is no such form from the Department of State to challenge a mail-in or absentee application or ballot. So we had to create one from whole cloth. So that's the reason, and it had to be presented to this board today. And now that we have authorization.
There are two different things. Challenging a voter's registration is different than what was discussed earlier.
Right.
Okay.
But I think that the question of whether you have standing applies to both.
Well, I
And
think
so-
where we landed, just to be clear, and Mr. McBlain made it clear, I thought, laid out where someone would clearly have standing. But then I asked him to confirm with Mr. Parks that the remainder of the question of standing would be one for the board to rule on at the time. It would be presented by the case. So there may be a circumstance, and believe me, I'm well familiar with standing. I happen to be a lawyer in my private practice, and we would have to evaluate whether someone has a particular injury, and we would discuss that at the time if that question was presented. So there's not a pre-ruling on everybody in the world, in California can't have standing. It's just an understanding of who definitely does. And the rest would be, as I understand it, part of the process of the board
Right.
reviewing that challenge. So
A federal election, though, I would think would apply to anyone in the country. But that's
Yeah, but Georgia law doesn't apply in Pennsylvania.
And interestingly, the opinion of the Georgia Supreme Court would seem to open the way for challenges by non-citizens, given the use of that particular term in their opinion, which is an interesting point.
But we'll deal with standing as appropriate. That would be our duty at the time. If someone challenges it that we think might not have standing, we need to discuss that and review it and potentially vote on it. All right. Any other public comment, Ms. Coker?
My comment regards public comment, which is included here, but up until May 12th of 2021, on the agenda for the Board of Elections, there was opportunity for public comment both at the beginning and at the conclusion of the meeting. And I don't know if that was a definite change in policy, if it just something that fell off the list as of May 12th. But such continuing that process, I think would be more in the interest of the public's, more in the public's interest. So why up until May 12th, 2021, was there on the agenda opportunity at the beginning of the meeting to address agenda items, and then at the conclusion of the meeting to address items of concern related to your operations? I think that should be
Well,
resumed.
I can't speak to what transpired before I arrived here, but I do know
You were
that-
here at that time,
you said May. That was
2021.
Yeah, that was probably one of the first meetings that, were held while
You
after
were
I
sworn in
arrived.
April, yes.
Yes. So if you'll allow me, the law requires that there's one public comment period to cover everything, whether it's agenda items. Now, you seem to be referring to the county council's practice, which I personally disagree with, but it doesn't matter, to offer one public comment period to cover anything, including the agenda items. So you can limit it to the agenda items and then offer another one at the end. We just offer one at the beginning to cover everything.
Well, prior to May of 2021, it was offered for discussion of items that had come up.
We're
during-
and we're in compliance with the law.
My point of view as the chair at the end, if you would,
Okay.
any other
Thank you
public
very
comment?
much.
Okay,
That's it.
thank you. I was here in 2020. I wasn't the chair at the time, and the chair does need to create an orderly process. And after review of the process previously, we've determined that this is a more orderly process to allow us to conduct the business and to hear the public comment as we would want to, and as we are required by law to do it. So that's the way that, frankly, I've decided we're going to do it. I think it's worked very well to allow, and as you can see, we're flexible. We do comment on things that have been brought up in public comment at various points in our review of the agenda thereafter. I think it's worked pretty well. And I think I was here in 2020 to 2021 before the meeting you're talking about, and we had meetings that ran, one meeting ran, 6, 7 hours. If we had had 2 public comments, it could have run 14 hours. I don't think that allows us to do the efficient work we need. Mr. Allen and his team do need to we want them, frankly, out of this room at a decent time to continue the great work that they're doing. So that's on me, Ms. Coker. It was my decision, and that's how I've chosen to run these meetings. With that, any other public comment? All right, Ms. Winterbottom.
So back to voter registration, we did receive a list submitted by a citizen who was asking about double registrations that had occurred very recently. And I wanted to, and we run jobs to look for double registrations and eliminate or merge them when need be. But I wanted Crystal to, Crystal Winterbottom is the manager of our voter registration department, and to explain the many different scenarios that this can occur. This isn't a matter necessarily where a clerk has failed to look if a registration already exists under that name, date of birth, social security number, driver's license number, and an address. There are different scenarios where this can occur that are outside of the control of the Board of Elections.
Yeah, so there's many ways that a person can be registered in the Shore system more than once, whether it's in our county, in another county, or 2 in ours. One of the main causes of that could be that when a voter goes to PennDOT, that application goes to that county that they were registered in, saying transfer the records to this new county, say it's Delaware County. In the midst of that takes a couple days because that county has to send out what we call a pending CAVN OC notice to that voter. So it's in a pending status in that county. In the meantime, that voter also sends in a paper application, which is now pending HAVA verification. It automatically just gets approved once the transfer happens and the HAVA is verified. So it creates 2 records, one holding the original county that voter ID number, you can see that it starts in like 00. The higher you get, the numbers just keep going up throughout the whole state. So right now we're at like 114 maybe, or I don't know, but the number just keeps going up. So you can see an older number, a lower number, and a higher number. So that is one of the main causes. It could be a human error, where maybe another county had one and only had the last four of the social, but when they sent in an application, the name was different, address was different now in ours. We had a driver's license and maybe the signature didn't appear to match to us and we approved it as a new. And then that's where our ERIC letters could go out saying, hey, there's a possible duplicate. So there's many reasons that someone can be registered in the SURE system twice.
And they're not, and that does not inherently indicate illegal activity.
No, not at all. So we run what Jim was saying, that we run reports that are hundreds and hundreds of pages. So I can run a report, and I think I talked about this at the last meeting. Everybody in Delaware County with the same last four socials, and it will show me, which could be a lot. And then I have to go line by line, which ones could be the same ones. Some people have different last names, different addresses, and it's very hard to match up. Driver's license, that report is easier for me to run and look through where, I won't get any more than a page. We run this at least on non-busy times once a week. Busy times like now, I'm hoping to get it once a week, but maybe once every other week. We did just get a list of about 48 names, I think, and which is like 20 some voters, that I was able to merge the records together, not for all of them, because some were already done previously by us. But all the rest were able to be merged, which made it easier on me because I didn't have to go through hundreds of pages to find those. So it was nice.
48 names, a couple dozen voters in reality, and out of how many are registered right now across Delaware County?
416,264 registered voters in Delaware County.
Thank you.
I mean, the reality is that it's an ongoing process. And as we reviewed at the other meeting, the law requires us to give a lot of notice to make sure that voters are not just purged from the rolls inappropriately, but that doesn't mean that there's something illegal happening with those voters. So
Correct.
thank you. Do you have how are you doing? It's a busy time, as you indicated.
Yeah,
Please tell us
so,
about that.
and we haven't seen this for our office and voter reg since 2016, 2020. We didn't see anything close to this. We started seeing an uptick in applications coming through the end of July. So we do have a backlog right now. Our online applications right now are only back from yesterday, a backlog from yesterday and today. Our paper applications are where we're seeing the most backlog. We're about 4 days out right now. We have processed, since May, we have processed 60,000 applications. We've also seen hundreds and hundreds of cancellation forms that may have been mailed to other voters from other organizations saying, hey, update your registration. We have seen those, a lot more of those come in. We've seen a lot of duplicate, whether it was online applications or paper mail, different from the duplicate merging. Duplicate where a person could fill anywhere from 2 forms, and we've seen some voters fill out close to 15 forms.
I think that's where Mr. Allen indicated earlier that they may be insecure that they had properly
Yeah.
registered, and the best way would not be to file 15 applications, but to check their registration.
Yes. I also don't know if it's that the reason. I know there's a lot of registration drives out and about. And I feel that there's voters just filling, I really don't know. I never knew why someone would fill out 15 forms every other day. I don't know.
I don't know.
I never understood.
Oh, we would encourage people not to. do that.
Anxiety?
I guess, I don't know, but we still have to process, and it
Right,
does
of course you
take
do.
a lot to still process a duplicate, especially on paper applications, reading the handwriting, reading the birthday, the address. Is it the same? Are they moving it one door over? Did they just not mean to? So that's where our backlog starts, is trying to figure out one form and it backs up the next two. So, but the voter registration, my guys in voter reg, they impressed me. I mean, we went from stack high the other week, and now they're just down to the 4-day stacks. I mean,
No doubt.
It's
You have a great team.
impressive.
Thank you.
thank you.
Any questions?
I did have a question for Crystal. So of the 60,000 roughly registration forms that we received this year, do we know how many of those were quote bad or, that came back to us or were, because
So these 60 are actually approved and processed, whether it was transfers, cancellations. I do not have that number of our declined apps or pending non-precinctable or pending HAVA verification notices sent. That is not included in these 60 approved applications. I can get those, but those numbers are growing. So we do see a lot that we're waiting. Our college dorms, for instance, we need a dorm name. So they're in a pending status, missing information. I have sent email to every one of those that we have been able to have an email or a phone number, including the letter that we mailed to the voters asking for their dorm name, or they missed their birthday, or they didn't sign it. I don't have those pending numbers. We also have declined a lot for invalid addresses, or we're seeing a lot for the state of Delaware that we had to decline out of jurisdiction. I don't have those numbers. They're not in that 60,000.
So it's more.
Yes.
And I imagine at least some of the ones that are rejected are duplicates because I know we have a lot of well-meaning
Yes.
third-party groups out there registering people at supermarkets, at train stations. So I don't know if I'm registered. We'll fill it out just in case. And
Yes.
right. Yeah.
So that number is part of the 60,000. So, because we're able to approve it and link it to a
Got it.
voter.
So you regard it as an update.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Would you like, at the next meeting, maybe we could have Ms. Winterbaum present the universe of applications?
well, sure, as we get closer to that, what was the total amount of registered voters now?
416,264.
Yeah, I just thought 60,000 was a lot. I mean, considering, it's a 550,000 people in the county. You
Well,
have
60,000.
400,000 registered already, and consider the number of people under 18 years old, wouldn't seem that there would be a universe of
There could be in and
60,000.
out, right? Some people.
So
And some of them are duplicates of existing registrations.
the new applications that are approved new are at 24,456. My address changes are at 11,695. We have name changes at 5,848. We have party changes at 6,048. And we have the duplicates.
So like 24,000 is the actual new number.
New.
Okay.
So 60,000s are.
It makes a little bit more sense.
Cancellations from other counties, transfers, that's like all approved applications.
Okay.
Sorry.
We're typically right around 400,000 and at a peak of like about 420 in presidential years. So we're right in that zone that we were at 4 years ago and 8 years ago.
Yeah, 20,000 or 24,000 new.
It's the net new number you were looking for.
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense than 60,000.
Yeah, no, 60,000 is what we,
And you haven't reported how many people have moved and come off our rolls from that.
no, I think to get that is because.
I'm not asking you to get that. I just.
It's just every second's changing. Every
Right, right.
time someone
But,
does.
but that there's not, the net new is, I just happened to look at the last election. I think we had 405 on our total potential voters in the primary, and now we're at 415, so.
We've also gotten some of our ERIC letters. We're still getting back, and right now we are at a total of about 3,000. So that's including undeliverable ERIC letters that we sent out in the summer, and also ones that sent us back saying they moved in county, they moved out of county, they're deceased. Out of those that we sent, I don't have the total number again that we sent originally. I think it was like 11,000 or some. 17 deceased, staying at the address, 163, 712 moved out of state, 112 we transferred to another county, 465 moved to another address within the county, and then 9 requested to cancel on that letter.
I thought you were going to ask whether there was a Taylor Swift effect on our registrations. I was waiting for you to say that. No, you don't want to know.
You know,
Are you in your voter registration era?
well, I have three daughters between the age of 25 and 20. So Taylor Swift is something that's been omnipresent in our house. And of course, I, say, do you really want to listen to somebody who, 90% of their hit songs come from the bad decisions that she's made choosing people? So,
Rest in peace to our inbox.
yes.
All right, well, anything else from Ms. White?
Why we had to touch that third rail, I don't.
Because I actually thought he was going to say it. I don't know why I imagined it coming out. of his mouth.
I am.
Have you seen any effect from, and then I just was waiting for it. I'm sorry. All right, we have to have a little humor. Any questions for Ms. Winterbottom?
No, the gold standard voter registration department as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hang in there. It's a lot of work, but
Yes.
it's important.
Thank
We
you,
appreciate
Crystal.
what you do.
Thank you.
All right, with that, if there's no further business, then I will adjourn. Are we? Now, you the other day took a vote to adjourn. I did notice that.
I'll leave it to Mr. Parks, but
If we need to vote to adjourn every time, I'm happy to vote.
It's a regular form of such things under Robert's rules.
Years ago, I looked at this issue in Robert's rules, and I think the chair can declare the meeting
I
adjourned
thought that
without a
was true.
vote
Okay,
technically, but I think it's been the practice as perhaps a courtesy to have a vote. But
Okay.
I think under strict Robert's rules, you don't need.
well, I think it sounds like you would like that practice. Would you like that practice or
How
no?
dare you impose an early dismissal?
Okay, I know action item.
I'm
right?
ambivalent.
I
don't
would
care
speak
either
up
way.
if I didn't think the meeting should need to be adjourned. So I'm fine.
Then with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.